Well, hey everyone, how's it going? I'm heading to the garage. I'll show you kind of where I'm at right now with the putting everything back together. Obviously, you guys know that I've been working on this thing pretty much non-stop over the last week or so, ever since I got the transmission back fully rebuilt. So anyway, let's take a look here what we got going on. A lot more room obviously now, and I did some cleaning. You know, it looks a messy over here, but I just got done working on it. I'm done for the day actually, because I need to get a power steering pump pulley puller. I don't know how in the heck I was able to get that off without a pulley puller, but I cannot. The pulley itself butts up against this when I try to slide it in there, so I'm just gonna rent the pulley puller. It's like a $50 deposit or something from one of the auto parts stores nearby, so I'm just going to do that. But anyway, so the motor still isn't sitting, and that's because I wanted to get the AC pump back on, which I did. It's much easier to access when you can get access to these bolts, especially the one underneath there. I still need to tighten the one down there because I can't reach it from down here, but once the motor's down, I'll be able to get up underneath there and reach it. And so basically it's sitting almost where it's going to be sitting. You can see I just need to move it forward a little bit. I've got the transmission mount right there, which is still in good shape. Then I'm going to put that back there. I had to remove some of the front end pieces. I had to remove this front end piece here because my cherry picker was rubbing up against here and I couldn't get the motor to move back any further. And I've got it on the half ton setting here, so the arm is kind of inward and I couldn't extend the arm any further. So anyway, as soon as I get that power steering put back together, and I'm going to run the lines, obviously. I'm going to do that while the motor is free and able to move back and forth. I'm going to take care of that because there's enough slack down there where I can hook this stuff all up. Much easier to access. And then I also have the MagnaSteer. One of the few that's actually left that has to be plugged in. Of course, some of the stuff in front here has to be plugged in, but I want to set the motor in first. And that harness on the other end there is way back there. I mean, it is a stretch, as far as you can stretch this thing. So before I set the motor in, I want to make sure that I grab a hold of that, because obviously it's going to be impossible to grab hold of with the transmission in place. Went ahead and did the manifolds off the motor. It was way easier to do it off the motor. Got the radiator in before I put the motor in. Reason being is because of this hose right down there that I've already connected. That one was a real pain to get to with the motor in the way. Obviously the hood latch is sitting there. That's just because it gave me some extra room, which I actually didn't need all that extra room, but I took it off anyway. And so yeah, I mean, basically, when I get the power steering put back on the motor, I'll be able to set the motor down and then bolt it back up to the subframe. And then it's literally a matter of putting everything back together. My confidence level has increased substantially since I pulled this out. And the hardest part that I found was actually the AC. That was so difficult to reach and to get underneath. It just was. It was easier to get off, obviously, than it was to get back on. It was a real nightmare. I had a lot of choice words with it. And then I had a small issue with the rear engine mount. You can probably see it from in there, maybe. Where am I at? Looking at my camera. There it is. The rear engine mount, now it's mostly in place right now, but that thing was getting hung up on the subframe. So what I ended up having to do, there's just no room in here. I mean, General Motors did not design the W body with the V8 in mind number 1, and they definitely didn't design it so that you could pull the motor out the top. Getting it out is way easier going out the top than it is going through the floor, but getting it back in can present its own challenges. So the real problem was that shoehorning this, you can see just how close this is to here. Now this is all freely moving around right now, but I had the hell of a problem getting the motor to slide back far enough to get up underneath here. And you can see I scratched up some of the paint in the transmission. I did a little bit of damage right here from this, but I was just slow and careful, and I didn't, do any permanent damage or any damage that's going to affect anything in the car at all. But holy crap, it was so much easier just to lift this thing out than it was to put it back in. And I hooked everything up beforehand, like the starter. As I said, the manifold, I plugged all the harnesses in. I repaired a bunch of the harnesses that had chipped away over time with heat. So, I did a whole bunch of repairing, and I got most of the harnesses all plugged in. In fact, all the harnesses are plugged into the motor, with the exception of the starter over here, the two main starter, ground and positive for the starter. The ground goes to the transmission. And so I did a lot of repairs, got all the harnesses plugged in that I could get plugged in, that I knew were going to be a pain to plug in when the motor was sitting in the engine bay. So yeah, I mean it was a real pain in the ass to get this thing really lined up, and I ended up having to take a bar and just kind of wedging back and forth in some spots just to wiggle it enough, because you can see, I bumped up against this a couple of times. You can see where I bumped up against that. Fortunately, as I said, there was no damage. It was just stop, take a deep breath, and whatever. Eventually, towards the end, I ended up dropping the motor completely down, and it was sitting on the bolts where the motor mount is. It was just sitting on there, and I was really afraid that I was going to break a bolt by doing that. Fortunately, nothing happened. That was so that I could adjust, because getting the motor in, you can't go straight in with the motor level, and you try to drop it, you're going to hit all sorts of shit over here. You're just going to hit everything. The ABS control module, the power steering, or excuse me, the brakes, brake booster, and the reservoir and so on. You're just going to hit all of this shit when you're coming in here. So the idea is to come at it from an angle. Transmission is lower than the motor, so you bring the motor over like this, and you get it up underneath all of this crap right here, okay? Then drop the motor, as long as it's safe to do so. And I looked all over the place. I actually ended up bending one of these heater hoses. Let's see where it's at. I ended up fixing it, but where did it go? Anyway, one of these heater hoses I actually bent. I'm going to have to look at it before I get everything back together, but I bent it slightly. Not enough to do any damage, but because it was hitting right here. You can see some of the scratches that I put in here, and I'm going to have to probably put some sealant down on this before I take it out, just because I don't want this to start rusting up on me. But you can see where the heater hose was hitting, and I just wasn't paying attention, and the motor rocked back, and it hit this hard and bent one of these hoses down here, and actually crushed the rubber hose. And I pulled everything back out and double checked it to make sure everything was fine. And yeah, it was fine. I mean, you can see there's just no room in here. So when I set the motor down, I readjusted my strap. The further back you go this way, the higher the part of this motor wants to come up. The further back this way, the more level it's going to be. So I've got it pretty much level right now. And so it's just a matter of getting the power steering hooked up back together, setting the motor back down in its cradle with the transmission mount in place, and then just slowly start putting everything back together. When I first took on this project and I was looking at the manual on how to do this, as far as the GM way on how to do this, there were so many harnesses, so many things to unplug. and it was pretty overwhelming, but actually putting it back together seems less overwhelming. And like I said, I've got all of the harnesses pretty much put back together off the motor. There's obviously a few here that I still have to plug in. You know, obviously the one for like the evap and so on, that all has to be plugged back in. And of course the hoses, but once I get this thing set and I get the power steering put back together, it's easy street from here. I mean, it literally is. I've got a new axle for the passenger side. Basically, I just take all these parts and I just put them back together. I mean, really, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the axles in. And I'll get a video of this, but I'm going to get the axles in. I'm going to get the radiator in. You know, I'm going to do all that stuff, and then I'm going to hook power up to it, and I'm going to try to start it, or I am going to start it. I still have to get the torque converter bolts hooked up yet, but I'm going to start it. That way I don't have everything all put back together, wheels on, ready to roll out the door, and then what? It doesn't start. You know, something else goes wrong. Something like that. So I think I got all the ground. There's only 3 ground wires in total. Actually, there's 5 really. If you think about it, there's one. The main ground is down there that runs to the battery. You've got a ground right there. There's 2 grounds in the front, and then there's 1 ground in the back, in the very back. That's it. So I cleaned all the terminals, and they're ready to, you know, the ones I haven't hooked up yet, they're ready to go. But I shouldn't have a no start issue. And again, when I hook up the battery, you know, I'll turn it to on, and I'll make sure that I don't have any trouble codes or anything else like that. And then I'll crank it and make sure that it's running with the axles in there. I'm not going to have it in drive. I'm not going to drive it or anything. I just want to make sure that it's going to start. So that's pretty much what I'm going to be doing. Because I really would hate to put all this back together and then have it not start, not do something, anything, or have some other problem. I'm going to do an oil change because this motor sat in the air for so long and it kind of sat at an angle. I am going to do an oil change before I start it, just to be on the safe side. I think my last oil change was about maybe 1,500 miles, but that 1,500 miles is 6-7 months. I mean, I don't put very many miles on this car at all. I really don't. So, you know, it's just one of those things. Anyway, so that's the update for today. Another thing that I am going to be doing, and you'll see this later, these I'm going to be pulling out, and I just found out that you can actually get to them from underneath here. I thought I was going to have to pull the fender off and everything. Apparently you don't need to. Those, as well as the front end, the lower grill, as well as the upper 2 grills, I'm going to be painting red. That's real paint, not Plasti-Dip. I'm also going to be adding red stripes, which I have, and I bought it about a year ago. I'm going to add the red stripes on the fender. So that's the plan, and hopefully it'll look good. I ended up going with an apple red rather than a dark cherry red. I didn't want it to look kind of ridiculous. I wanted to try to match the Pontiac color as much as possible. Okay, guys, well, 13.5 minutes. That's your update for you. And, of course, I will get you another update in the next day or two. I'm really hoping to start this thing up by the end of the week. I really am. Hopefully Saturday or Sunday I'll get a first start. So, all right, guys, we'll catch you later. Take care.